So as we've been talking about over the last few weeks, I believe Jesus is inviting us to join a revolution of tenderness, to follow his path of nonviolent love, to follow his path of hospitality, of kindness, of fierce vulnerability, his path of courageous tenderness. In this violent and harsh and crumbling world, it is actually very difficult to choose tenderness. It seems almost impossible to show love and compassion to our enemies. And I've been thinking about this, and I don't think we can just try really hard to live this way and it's just going to work. Many of us have been trying really hard and we continue to fail. We're going to need to tap into the deep roots of our faith and our spirituality. I believe it's going to be through intimate connection and fellowship with Jesus that we're going to gain the strength and the courage to love with tenderness and compassion. You know, I chose our story for today because it speaks to me in my current moment of life. And the story really serves as an invitation to me to go deeper, to connect with Jesus in fresh ways, and to find my foundation and my security, ultimately in my relationship with God. Our story for today is a fairly well-known scripture in the Gospel of Luke. It's beloved by some, and it's hated by others. Let me be clear up front. This story can be a bit problematic, depending on how you read it. Traditionally, it's been interpreted in some very simplistic and unhelpful, and I think even hurtful ways. Today we're going to dig into the actual text and we're going to ask some questions and we're going to seek to get at the essential message of these verses. And my hope is to shed some new light on this well-known story in the life of Jesus. So I'm going to read it for us. It's from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. So as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." I heard a few years ago a woman online was writing about this, and she shared these thoughts about this passage, which I think hits the nail on the head, particularly for women as they read this story sometimes. She says, "This story lives in quiet infamy, for I don't even know how long it's been preached the same way. Martha was the busy one, Mary was the quiet one. Martha was too busy to have a relationship with Jesus, and Mary, through her meekness and listening, did the right thing. And shouldn't you be a Mary too? Why, yes, you should." She said, hashtag all the guilt. She was feeling guilty about maybe not being the meek and quiet and listening one that she thought she was supposed to be. For women in particular, this passage has been problematic at times. All too often, women are told you either are Mary or you are Martha, the active woman or the meek woman. I'm not here to suggest that anyone should be Martha or Mary. Only Martha is Martha, and only Mary can be Mary. I think both of these women are incredible women in the Bible, and they offer, I think, really something for us in this important encounter with Jesus. From their encounter with Jesus, I think all of us, women and men, can learn about what it means to be a disciple. There's not going to be any Team Martha or Team Mary today. You may connect more with Martha, you may connect more with Mary, and that is okay. But both women have wonderful stories. And the reality is both of these women were powerful leaders in the Jesus movement. Let's dig into these verses. I just want to jump right into it. I don't do this too often, but we're going to kind of break it down verse by verse, all right? I went to some churches in college, and they'd always do verse-by-verse preaching, and they would preach for an hour on a really small section of Scripture. I'm not going to do that, don't worry. But we are going to break it down verse by verse because I think there's some powerful stuff here. So we'll begin at verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. Now, there's actually a lot going on in this verse. This is one of those verses you might just skip over as kind of a transition verse. But first, Jesus and his disciples were on their way. This is a theme all throughout the Gospels, that Jesus and his disciples were on the move. They were always moving from place to place. This tells us, I think, that they had a mission. They had a purpose. They were not stagnant. They were not just sitting around. They were doing something. They were following where the Spirit led them. In chapter 9, we read that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. They were on their way toward Jerusalem. This was the place of power. This was the place where Jesus would meet his awful fate on the cross. There is danger often along the way. Jesus was a hunted man. Herod Antipas was after him at this point in the gospel, and he was wanting to kill Jesus. He was a wanted man. Perhaps they moved around so much because they had to avoid getting caught, and they couldn't stay too long in one place. They came to a village where a woman named Martha lived. We learn from the Gospel of Mark, or John actually, that Martha lived in Bethany, which was a town very close to Jerusalem. Jesus had instructed the 72 followers to go out into the villages and find people of peace who would offer hospitality and welcome. And Martha was one of these people of peace in one of these towns that would offer hospitality. She opened her home to Jesus and his disciples. A few things about Martha. One, she was the owner of a home, which would have been fairly rare in the ancient Near East. The oldest male in the house would be the one listed as the owner of a home. So it's a bit strange, actually, that Martha is listed in Luke as the owner of this house. She was going against the grain. Martha also had some wealth. She owned a home, and she had enough space in her home to host Jesus and his followers. We learn in John that she had a brother named Lazarus, the same Lazarus who died and Jesus brought back to life. When Lazarus died, they actually had a cave on her property that they were able to bury Lazarus in, and roll a big stone in front of it. If she had a burial cave on her property, she probably had a lot of resources. Martha was also well known. When Lazarus died, we read that people came all the way from Jerusalem to comfort her, and so she was connected to many people. Martha was also very courageous. For her to be willing to host Jesus and his disciples in her home, that took a lot of courage. Knowing that Jesus was a marked man, that the authorities literally were looking for him. And she provided her home, in many ways, a safe house for Jesus and his people, so the authorities could not find him, give him a moment of refuge and peace before he made his way into Jerusalem. Courageous woman as well. Moving to verse 39, she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what Jesus said. So Martha's sister was a woman named Mary. So we know that Mary and Martha and Lazarus were all siblings. And we know from the Gospels that Jesus was close to all three of these folks. He was really close to this family. Mary is also the same woman, we believe, who brought the expensive perfume to Jesus and put it at his feet, meaning that another sign that their family had some resources. The text tells us that Mary sat at the Lord's feet. I remember sermons about this passage that depict Martha kind of as the busy woman in the kitchen who's, cleaning the kitchen, fluffing pillows, sweeping the floor, and Mary is kind of cross-legged, sitting at Jesus' feet, doing Bible study with Jesus. Sitting at Jesus' feet was way more than just doing Bible study at his feet. The phrase is used to describe that of a disciple, actually. A disciple would be someone who sat at the feet of their teacher. So think about this. Mary, a woman, is described as a disciple in the Gospel of Luke. She was at the feet of Jesus, taking the position of a disciple, learning from Jesus, seeking to become like Jesus. She wasn't doing Bible study. She was training to be a disciple. She wanted to learn his ways. She wanted to follow him. Many scholars point out that the position at the feet of a teacher was most often reserved for men in the ancient Near East. Women would rarely be found at the feet of a teacher in the position of a disciple. Yet Mary, I don't know if she was permitted to do this by the people around her. She just bucked tradition and she took on the position of a disciple of Jesus because she wanted to be a disciple that bad. And this is a pretty miraculous thing what she did. She took that position right at the feet of this radical rabbi who had the authorities wanting to kill him. Mary was bold. She was courageous, and she desired to follow Christ regardless of where Jesus was going to lead her. In verse 40, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to come and help me out." So while Mary is at Jesus' feet, learning about his way, Martha was distracted, or as other translations read, she was worried, upset, busy, stressed. Have y'all ever felt those things before? Martha was stressed and distracted and anxious, it says, about all the preparations that had to be made. Now, most people have read this passage and just assumed that Martha was in the kitchen cooking. But the text actually doesn't say that, all right? We need to be careful not to just assume things. Perhaps people assume Martha was preparing food because that is often what women are expected to do then and now. Of course, hospitality in the ancient Near East was important, and they certainly would have fed these folks who were there. However, I agree with Warren Carter, who argues we need to get Martha out of the kitchen. The word in Greek is translated preparations is the word diakonia is the word in Greek. And we get the English word deacon actually from this Greek word. And today, deacons are leaders in the church who are committed to serving the community and providing leadership for a congregation of people. That particular word in the early Christian community would have meant something very similar. In Acts, we read, the same person Luke wrote Acts as well. This word is used 8 times. And whenever it's used, it's usually it always refers to providing leadership and service for the Christian community. And so I would argue a more accurate description of what Martha's struggle would be was that, but Martha was distracted by much ministry. I do not believe Martha was only distracted by the task of making food or fluffing pillows or sweeping the floor. Those tasks are important, and the people who do those jobs are just as important as anyone else. However, I think when we're looking at Martha, we need a bigger and more full understanding of what was going on with Martha and why she was so stressed out in this moment. Traditional interpretations have pointed to the fact she's stressed out about trivial things, and she just needs to let all that go and sit at the feet of Jesus. But that's not what was going on. Martha was a leader in the Jesus movement. She was providing much-needed ministry to the community. She was doing the very important and critical work of sustaining the movement that Jesus was leading. I want you to think of Martha more as an organizer than a housemaid, okay? She was out there doing this work, protecting the people, providing for the people, opening her home, doing all the things that needed to be done to ensure that this Jesus movement would continue. It makes sense to me when knowing this, why she would want some help. It's not like she's cooking and like, this is hard, I want someone to help me. No, she was doing something really, really important and difficult and scary. When Jesus sent out his followers, he sent them out in pairs, right? Ministry is meant to be done in partnership. And Martha was wanting her partner, her sister Mary, to come and help her out in that moment. It makes sense to me that she would be a little bit frustrated in that moment. Another thing to point out here is Martha tries to triangulate the situation, which is not always healthy. Instead of going directly to Mary, saying, "Hey, Mary, can you come help me?" she tells Jesus to tell Mary to come and help her. And that's not a healthy way to deal with conflict, yet we often do it, don't we? Verse 41, Jesus responds to Martha, and he says, "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one." You know, Jesus kind of provides some correction for Martha in this moment, but I hear a lot of compassion, understanding. I hear tenderness in this moment when Jesus says Martha's name twice, "Martha, Martha." He acknowledged and validated her experience that she was upset and worried about so much. He saw that. He knew that. Remember, the things Martha was upset about were very important things, even good things. And yet Jesus reminded her in this moment of what was more important and most important in that moment. He says that really only one thing matters in the grand scheme of things. And he goes on to say, "Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." You know, the translation, "what is better," it makes us think that Jesus is comparing Mary and Martha and telling people you need to be like Mary. But the text doesn't really say that when you get into the Greek. In my opinion, it's more like Mary has chosen something good. Mary has chosen something really good. Mary has chosen what is important right now in this moment. Essentially, Mary has chosen to spend time with Jesus, to learn from him, and to focus her attention on him. You know, Martha was so distracted by so many good things. She was organizing, supporting the Jesus movement, likely through her connections and her wealth. She's trying to pull strings and open doors for them, her leadership, her hospitality, her skills. But in that moment, Martha was so consumed in her work, perhaps so consumed in the heaviness of the moment, all the things that needed to happen, that she became very self-focused. Seems like she became resentful, and ultimately lost sight of the most important part of the Jesus movement, which was Jesus himself. This story isn't really about Martha's actions. It's not about who's better, Mary or Martha. To me, it's about our priorities, and it's about our need so often to hear that message from Jesus and think about where we are focusing our energy and where we're spending all of our stress and our, mental energy. You know, we understand this. We know what it's like to get distracted, to get worried, to get stressed about all the many and important and good things in our lives. The task we have to do, the relationships that we need to cultivate, the events we have to attend, the obligations that we have, the many appointments for ourselves and for our children and for other people in our lives, our careers, our families. We all understand this stress all too well. At this moment in history, many of us here are worried and we are stressed out about really big and scary things. And that is okay, because there are a lot of big and scary things out there. We know that it's all too easy, though, to lose our focus and kind of get our priorities a bit out of whack. I'll tell you about one of my struggles. You know, this is something I'm working on, but some days, you know, Laura and I will be hanging out at the house, and it'll be after work, on our day off maybe, and Laura can tell that I'm not fully present in the moment. In those moments, I can be a little short. I can not be very kind. I can have a lack of warmth. She knows that something is off. And on my better days, I can kind of slow down and look inward. I don't always do that very well. And try to discern kind of what's going on. And I can often see that I'm holding a lot of stress. And it's impacting my ability to be present with my family. Does anybody else have that struggle? That you're holding a lot of things and it impacts your ability to be there? Lately, I've been stressed out about a lot of things, and some of them are important things. I've had this crushing heaviness, for example, for my immigrant neighbors who are being targeted and demonized and pursued. And parenting has often felt very overwhelming to me. And work can be very, very demanding. It's occurred to me that I have something in common with Martha. I can easily become distracted and worried about much. Ministry, become discouraged and distracted and stressed out about all the things of life. And I hear Jesus saying to me this week, John, John, you are worried and you are distracted by many things. Maybe right now there is something that is better for you. Maybe you need to refocus. Maybe you need to step back and spend some time at my feet. You know, I'm kind of a doer. I like to do things, you know. But I know we can't just stay at Jesus' feet. We've got to act. We've got to reach out. We've got to love. However, this week, this story is reminding me that action is not everything. Sometimes our good work, our obligations, our busyness, it can distract us from the most important thing, which is to spend time at Jesus' feet and be filled up and fed by Him. My friend Logan sent me a podcast with this guy, Russell Moore. He was interviewing a guy named John Guerra. I've sung one of his songs in the last few weeks, but he's a musical artist. And this guy was talking about kind of all the chaos in the world and the unsettling nature of things right now. And he said something that stuck with me, and it kind of shimmered for me in a way, and I've held on to it. But he said, being washed in the Word of Jesus is the only way to stay sane in a world that is so topsy-turvy. He said, being washed in the Word of Jesus. And that idea of being washed in the Word of Jesus made me think of Mary in this story, that Mary was at the feet of Jesus, just being washed in the words of Jesus. Imagine what that did for her soul. Imagine what that did for her courage, and imagine how the strength that gave her to continue moving forward and following Jesus all the way to the cross. You know, to join the revolution of tenderness that I referenced, it's going to require a lot of courage. It's going to require a lot of strength for us to love radically. It's going to require us to live kind of counterculturally, to reject the way of power and violence, and to follow the nonviolent path of compassion and solidarity with other people. And the source of that courage and power, I believe, will come from those tender moments of quiet time with Jesus. Those moments of solitude, those moments when we are reading the Gospels and letting the words of Christ just wash over us. Those moments, those tender moments of learning and growing and changing at the feet of Jesus. I imagine many of you this morning are distracted and worried by many things. Is anybody distracted and worried by many things right now? If you're brave enough to raise your hand, you can. I'm wondering together, and I'm doing this myself, are we taking time to spend at Jesus' feet? Are we taking time to be with Him, to learn from Him, and just connect with Him? This morning we had a small little group of us at the Wounded Healers meeting that we had this morning, and Rob was sharing about getting out in nature and allowing the birds and the trees and all the things to speak to us. And I believe Jesus can meet us in those moments of quiet. But I have some questions I want to ask you this morning, and really these are for all of us today. And I'll just put them up here and read them and just let you think about these just for a moment. And I put a few, some of them might resonate with you, but what is distracting you today? What is distracting you today? What are you worried about right now? My list is rather long sometimes. Might say, what are you not worried about today? So much, it seems. What is taking your time and your energy? And then just wondering, where is Jesus fitting into all of this? Where is Jesus fitting into all of this? You know, I know there are a lot of us in this room who really feel like in our day-to-day lives, in our work, in our ministry, we are living for Jesus and trying to do all these things for Jesus. And I think Martha probably was thinking the same thing. I'm doing all this stuff for Jesus. She was doing this work, putting her life on the line for Jesus. But often we can do a lot of things for Jesus, yet we kind of miss Jesus in the process. We don't actually take the time to cultivate that friendship with Jesus. So are you taking time to spend with Jesus in prayer and studying and good conversation with people and worshiping with music and other ways? How do you connect with God? What nourishes your spirit? Another question, do you need a break? Sometimes we just need to be willing to say, I need a break. And maybe you need to ask the people who are in charge of your work schedules and things like that. Ask if you can take a break. Ask your family if you can take a break, if you need to get away on your own. And the final question is just, how is your heart? What is God saying to your heart right now? How is God speaking to you in this moment? Throughout the rest of our time together, we're going to share communion, we're going to sing, and this is a time perhaps that you can just take and just sit and think and pray. You don't have to get up right away and come take communion. If you want to hang to the back and just kind of take a moment to be still, you can kneel at the altar if you'd like and take that time, but maybe just think about some of those questions and kind of where you're at right now, and maybe how you can put aside some of the things that are stressing you out right now, even if they are good things and necessary and important things. How can you refocus a little bit and spend some time being washed in the Word of Christ? In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.